1, full course yellow is deployed. Full course yellow is deployed.
Yes, hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of Full Course Yellow in Pit Lane's weekly get-together Wednesday night chat session. As we sit around the water cooler or bowl of cereal or ice cream or whatever it is that we're having, and say hello to you and talk a bit about motorsport. Remember, In Pit Lane itself is returning to the screens of Melbourne and Geelong tomorrow night at the new later time of 8:30. Our special guest, Andrew McCarthy, from who's been racing this weekend at the Phillip Island Historic Classic. Huge field for that. We've got big field of Formula 5000s. Andrew is racing a Mora. In fact, there's going to be two Moras there, and as you'll see on the show tomorrow night, it's a car I'm really looking forward to having a look at it from whatever day I get down there. So and hopefully we'll have some footage and some interviews from the Phillip Island Historic next week on In Pit Lane as well. But joining us this week on Full Course Yellow, we have Peter Johnson, we have Dave Stillwell, and Mark Jones, survivor. Mark safe from the Brisbane public transport system. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the show. There we go. Well, you can unmute your mics now because we need to. As in the words of Cody Rhodes. Well, what do we want to talk about? We had a Formula One race on the weekend, on Saturday actually. So let's talk about that. Max won. We knew that was sort of going to happen, but Pete, let's start with you. What did you think of it all?
It was a bit of a snooze fest. Probably the highlight was Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo having a tete-a-tete.
Lots of love is in the air.
Yes. But it was, apart from that, it was a bit of a snooze fest. I thought.
Yuki's feeling the pressure a bit by the look of things. The young Japanese driver is under pressure because, putting himself under pressure as much as anything else because he's chasing the presumably empty slot at Red Bull next year.
It's not going to happen.
But
with Honda not being a part of it anymore. I mean, Honda, obviously he was sort of pushed in there and by Honda, but with Honda sort of being replaced by Ford in the grand scheme of things, I mean, could you see him hanging around even without, rather than going up to Red Bull? I mean, could you see him even keeping the seat he's got now if he doesn't have that input from Honda, that insistence that they have a Japanese driver in the team? Because I think they've got what 1 year left. When does Ford come in? Is it next year or the year? I think it's the next year. The year
2026.
After. So with the new regulations.
Yeah.
So he might have one more year if he's lucky.
And apart from last week, where they both qualified 13th and 14th, Yuki has actually qualified quite well up as far as 6th in the past, in the recent.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously got some. He's clearly got some talent. I mean, and he has been as fast, if not faster, than Daniel since Daniel returned, went back into the team. The interesting thing was, I mean, should Daniel have let him repass again? Because I mean, the deal was that one, Yuki should have got out of the road when he was told, and two, should Daniel have gone back and redressed the situation, because the idea was, let me through and I can get some points. That didn't happen, and Daniel himself said after the race, well, what does it matter if you're 12th or 13th? Or I mean, if you didn't have points, who cares really where you finish? Well, if that's the case, for the benefit of sort of team morale and keeping everybody happy. I mean, what would have Daniel have lost if he'd have sort of said, with on the start of the last lap, okay, Yuki, you that's as far as I got. Couldn't get any further. You can have it back now. Thank you very much. I'll return the favour.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's probably something that might not have occurred. I would be guessing.
Yeah, well, look, we have seen it in the past. I mean, we've seen it between sort of, Lewis has done it on occasions where I think the Ferrari guys have done it where they've said, so and so is faster than you. They've got it, they haven't been able to move through to get the next stage, so they just say, can you give that spot back now because he did move aside for you to give you a chance. You didn't take full advantage of it, so I'm just. Can you let your teammate back through again? He got out of the road for you, so you sort of return the favour. But yeah, interesting. Let's check if we've got there. Oh, yes, tomorrow night on In Pit Lane, incidentally, apart from Andrew McCarthy with talking about the Phillip Island Historic Classic, we have music from Rachel Parkinson. She's from a band called Little Feet Music, and she's obviously watching now. Hi, Rachel, how are you? Thanks for that. Yes, so Rachel tomorrow night. One song on Channel 31, two songs on the In Pit Lane YouTube channel with the extended version of the show, which I'm about to put up. So that'll go. That'll be premiering also at 9:30 tomorrow night on the In Pit Lane YouTube channel. Damien Young, woo! Yes, exactly. My thoughts exactly, Damien. And also Box. Evening to you, Box. So apart from what happened on the track, the great storm off the track is the ongoing political struggle within Red Bull. It seems to be a fight between sort of the head office in Austria and the racing division in England, and a bit of a power struggle between Christian Horner and Helmut Marko. Now Jos Verstappen jumped in like a complete idiot and didn't help matters by basically saying that Christian has to go. The rumor going around is that Max has an out clause in his contract which essentially says if Marko goes, I go, which is interesting because there's no doubt the only reason that Marko hung around and was basically re-signed time and time again was that he was mates with the boss. Well, the boss is gone now. And the rumor is that Christian would rather Helmut not get in the road and be a bit of a nuisance. So he wants Helmut gone. Helmut wants to protect his little bit of turf, and so you've got the European side with the Austrian head company, the major company, saying that we're looking askance at Christian. And then you've got obviously the racing side of it, where they would like Christian to stay. So, yeah, how this doesn't seem like it's going to end well.
I think Helmut's contract does come up at the end of the year.
But at the moment, it's certainly looking like if the head office have got anything to do with it. I mean, the guy is 80 years old, but that, as we've seen in Formula One, that doesn't seem to account for much at all. I mean, it's a bit like becoming American president.
Yeah.
So under those circumstances, could he be re-signed? But it's clear what side Jos is on now. Whether Max is in full step with his father or not, I don't know. But I think if I was Max, I'd be looking at if I was going to be on anybody's side, it'd be on the side of the team that's given me the opportunity to totally dominate Formula One for the past few years, and that seems to be Horner and Newey, because I gather that they're pretty close together, and that once again that's the other side effect that might come out of it. If Horner goes, does Newey go too? Because Adrian, he's got plenty. He'll have no shortage of takers, even if he doesn't do motorsport. He's got 1,001 other things that he can do in terms of his skills and in terms of his interests. He races he could come down to Phillip Island. I know he wants to. I know he said before that he'd love to come down to Phillip Island and do, but obviously he says, I'm a little busy at that time of year. Well, perhaps he won't be this time next year.
Well, that'd be fantastic to see him. He's got some fascinating bits of gear in his shed out the back.
Yeah, well, we see him quite regularly at things like Goodwood and those sorts of events. And he steers very quickly. He's quite quick too. I mean, we know his son also is a racing driver with a bit of talent. He's sort of been involved in sort of
Harrison
junior
Ewing.
level. Yeah, so he's very much involved. So it's very much a motorsport family, and I imagine that Adrian would have no problem at all finding things to keep him interested. And I'm sure he doesn't need the money anymore. And I think he's probably well set up in that respect.
Harrison's actually in a little bit of a crossroads at the moment. He's not a young driver anymore. He's 25. He's done a bit of time in a few different categories. He's not headed towards Formula One anymore. So it's going to be interesting to see where he is going. At the moment, it looks like GTs is his future.
As it is for a lot of drivers. I mean, sort of, thankfully for a lot of drivers, the explosion of sports car racing around the world has provided so many terrific opportunities for drivers who, otherwise would see, perhaps their career sort of passed by them, because there's a logjam at the top at Formula One. There's only ever going to be sort of the 20 major drives. So under those circumstances, if you can't, if you can't get in for one reason or another, even though you might have the talent. I mean, as we've seen with people like Liam Lawson and Teo Pourchaire, and Jack Doohan could be the next one who has to have a good look at his situation, because the rumours are going around that with the turmoil at Alpine at the moment, didn't they have a wonderful start to the year? They basically finished last, and then the day after, two of their senior technical staff either jumped or were pushed. I think were pushed, probably more like it.
It sounds like go, Dave.
Who here has binged the most recent season of Drive to Survive?
I haven't binged them all, but I've watched about 4 or 5 episodes.
Yeah, I haven't seen one. I saw one that was enough for me. I'm not a big fan of reality television.
Well, so the running theme through a number of the episodes was the absence or the departure by senior, or basically the captain of the ship in a number of the teams. We saw Otmar Safnauer depart Alpine because Alpine had very high performance goals in mind and a very strict time frame to achieve that performance. And since his departure, they've not performed anywhere near the level that they previously had. Consider that in 2022, they finished 4th in the Constructors. In 2023, they finished 6th. And in this opening event with a new car concept, they're in P19 and P20. If we have a look at the Haas team, Haas burst onto the scene, finishing, I think, 6th in the Constructors in their first year, and have successfully moved further and further down the grid. They've bid farewell to Gunther Steiner, who I believe will be joining the Channel 10 coverage of the Australian Grand Prix, which I think a lot of us will look forward to.
Yes.
Very much a character, although I'm not sure he might be familiar. He might need to get told what a watershed is, and why it's important to you can't get away with saying, "Oh no, that's just translated from my own home language." The Haas team is in a state of flux because the concept that the team was designed around, in terms of buying everything in as much as possible and doing as small amount of work in-house at the team as they could, that model's now broken. And, finally, we have a look at, we've been talking about the changeover at the artist formerly known as AlphaTauri. We saw the longtime team principal, Franz Tost, move away from the team, and obviously had new membership moving in there. So I think someone pointed out that, everyone thinks of James Voles as like the new kid on the block as far as a team manager, but he's not. He's now, after Toto and after Toto and Christian, he's now like the third longest serving team boss in pit lane. And I just, I look up and down the grid and, look at the examples that have been successful in the last 5 to 7 years. The artist formerly known as Racing Point, or 1 year it was referred to as Tracing Point, was like, our car's not working. Let's copy everything possible off the Mercedes that's winning. They brought out a car the next year that was dubbed the Pink Mercedes, and lo and behold, they had speed and they had performance and they had results. Come the second year of the new aerodynamic regulations, they basically looked at what Red Bull did the year before and copied as much as possible, or took influence as much as possible. And then they came out at the start of last year and started braining everyone in what a lot of people referred to as a green Red Bull. If you remember that awesome shot of one of the Williams being craned up over one of those massive cranes after it had been crashed in the wet, and then looking at, the underside of the car and how basic it looked. And then I think at the same event, we'd seen the underside of, say, Sergio Perez's Red Bull.
Yeah.
And seen how intricate the airflow management was under the car. The order of the teams in terms of performance is not really going to change that dramatically. I don't understand how Alpine can have these lofty performance goals when they're not they don't have the entrenched intellectual property that a Ferrari, a Mercedes, a Red Bull, or even a McLaren has. And they've just been through the process of turfing the guy who did the best result for the team that they poached him from. And they're a team that's working across, 3 different sites in 2 different languages in 2 different countries. Whereas the teams that are, that solidify all their operations in one space, so they get the, cross communication going on. It's the teams that can optimize everything they have in one location, a la Red Bull, a la Ferrari, even Mercedes to a point. Obviously, the powertrain's done separately, but they engineer that car and that powertrain together as one. And that's why when you're someone like a McLaren, or even when you're an Aston Martin, you buy the complete powertrain package with the rear suspension and every single component you are legally permitted to buy in the rules from your powertrain supplier. Aston Martin does and goes, I'll have that. And that's what they'll have. That's what works. I looked at that results sheet that came through because I didn't fancy staying up until 3:30, 4 a.m. to get a result from the opening Grand Prix of the season. It's Red Bull 1 and 2. It's Ferrari 3 and 4. Now, last year, Ferrari and Mercedes were separated. I think it was 2 points in the constructors by the end of the year. That's an each way bet. That's a leaf blowing into someone's intake at some point in the season. But when we look at further down the grid,
podium at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix gone a different direction.
Yeah, more on that later. Mercedes, McLaren, and then the 2 Aston Martins. I mean, we had no retirements. As much as we talk, it'd be great to see, RB get some points or Sauber the artist formerly known as Sauber get some points. If the top 5 teams run in the top 10 and, don't have any DNFs, be it mechanical or from accident damage, realistically, they're the teams that are going to be in the top 5 that get the results. I really don't see the bottom 5 teams, unless there's a big upset to the order in terms of how the progression of the cars goes through the season. Alpine does not, Alpine could have a season like Haas. They could have a season like Williams used to have a couple of years ago.
Well, there's another team that's improved quite a lot. Williams is, it's relative to where they were. They're certainly in a better position now, and and it looks like they're going to be replaced. If the opening round is any indication, then it looks like they're going to be replaced as the cellar dwellers by Alpine, and the management of Renault will not be happy about that, and there could be long-term implications.
this is the thing that's anyone who's watched any of the last few seasons of Drive Survivors, or even followed any of the industry discussion, whether it's Laurent Rossi or any of the people at the head of, be it Renault, at Alpine, at the Formula One team itself, it's very difficult, you can imagine, for that organization, for everyone to be pulling in the one direction when you've got a Formula One team based in England that's predominantly staffed by British people, that's traditionally been a British-based team, that's got a powertrain constructor that's officially French and wants to beat its chest about how great it is as this French brand. Now, Renault's had an on-again, off-again factory involvement in the sport and also as a powertrain supplier. But I don't understand how, when you look at you contrast their performance at the moment with what Williams is going through. Williams, and James Vowles clearly identified the deficits in the infrastructure that's around that team. They have a timeline in place to fix it. They have no lofty goals of going, we're going to be top 4 or top 5, this season. There's none of that, chest beating, not so much as unrealistic, but of these lofty, communicating these lofty goals that anyone who's got any semblance of understanding of, just how slowly, the development process is, for a teams that are such as gargantuan entities such as these, they have a timeline in place. They probably haven't spoken about it as much, but Williams is doing everything necessary to get back. Look, will they be top 3? Probably not. Will they be in a shade for, say, position 4, 5, 6? Absolutely. But one race does not a season make. But when you contrast, the performance of some of the cars and some of the drivers, and also a lot of the messaging coming at high level corporate and team management between some of these teams in the last 4 or 5 teams, it's very different approaches, and I struggle to see how some of those approaches will bear fruit throughout the course of the season. They look good on board meeting minutes, but in the real world with real people that have to make real investment of time and energy and blood, sweat and tears into delivering performance on track, I don't see how those two reconcile.
And like you say, Dave, one race does not make a season. Sergio finished second in Miami, in Bahrain last year, and when it got to Miami, that's when it went downhill. And also, just another thing to note, the commentators refused to call steak. They called it Sauber all the way through.
Yep. Well, because in some markets they're not allowed to call it steak, and they don't want to get in. They don't want to get in trouble with the corporate regulators.
Well, yeah, and it's an issue that's expanding across more than just motorsport. We're seeing cricket and football have both been involved in almost exactly the same issue.
Yeah, well, this is the problem. I mean, the gambling money is so huge. I mean, you see whole series being set up. I mean, if you ever want to laugh, I mean, just go onto KO or Fox Sports and see the European Cricket League. This is basically basically an amateur cricket competition involving countries that do not play cricket. The worst possible standard of middle-aged men, expat, mostly expat Indians and Pakistanis and Poms and Aussies, all sort of getting together and rolling their arm over and having a bit of backyard fun, actually being televised all over the world. And the reason for that is it's another thing for gambling companies to bet on, and it's only a matter of time till we see more of this with motorsport. In fact, I can sort of say it now because I actually had to sign an NDA many years ago regarding a plan which was for an international one-make series based around what we now know as the Aussie race cars, but back then was sort of the legends. And it was supposedly had Saudi money, and that was the whole idea. There was going to be sort of probably a field of around 20, similar set up to Formula One. There would be 2-car teams. The teams would have the drivers would be chosen at random through a lottery system. the drivers would be predominantly there would be basically one male, one female driver to each team, and the whole thing was going to be set up basically as a gambling thing from international betting companies. Now, it never ever happened, but it was they certainly planned it. There were tests done. There were a number of people were tested, and the reason I know is that ultimately Melissa was sort of one of them, because they were looking for young women who could drive, and that was part of the deal. And they would be based on sort of national things as well. So there'd be an Australian team, a New Zealand team, and a Saudi whatever. There would be all of those teams involved, and people would bet on them. So I'm surprised they haven't sort of brought back something like that, where you've got midweek, literally midweek motorsport, not the magazine show from Radio Show Limited, but an actual sort of midweek event, say a Wednesday European Wednesday night or Wednesday evening race events, purely and simply based around gambling.
Isn't that the whole purpose of the horse racing industry?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, nobody would go across the road to see a horse race if there wasn't gambling. And the money involved is, like, I know a few people in the horse racing industry, and the money even for midweek country meetings. So some of the prize money involved is extraordinary.
And get some interesting situations like happened. There's been stories about the Tasmanian racing industry of recent times that have been less than satisfactory, but pardon me, motorsport, I guess, is one of those sports that's kind of like cricket, in where there's a lot of opportunities for micro betting, and that is
microtransactions.
And that's one of the things to be.
There's a new ad for Sportsbet advertising that you can bet on motorsport.
That's interesting. Yeah, I haven't seen it, but Boxers has obviously seen it. You've seen, so that's a wonder I haven't seen it, because I mean, it doesn't matter what you watch on KO or YouTube for that matter. I mean, you're absolutely assaulted by bloody Sportsbet and other companies. And even I have to sort of say that we've been approached in Pit Lane. I mean, we're always looking for sponsorship. And I wouldn't take it anyway, but we can't take it for reasons for both Channel 31 and RMI TV in not accepting gambling sponsorship. But we've been approached pretty much every year for the past 8 to 10 years in terms of we're happy to sponsor your program, but the deal is always, we will supply you with certain stories. We'll supply you with the angle that you need to take in order to promote people to bet on the races the races and the series that you're talking about. And I said, well, that's one. It wouldn't happen anyway, but we're not allowed to do it even. I mean, they haven't spoken any sort of amounts, but they said it would be very lucrative for us, and that'd be lovely, but. As I said, one, we can't do it, and two, I probably wouldn't do it. So,
But therein lies that sort of symbiotic relationship with, the traditional media and sort of modern interpretation of that, which is tailored to the sponsors and the advertisers and the co-promoters of the sport that the so-called journalists, in a lot of cases, are purporting to report on. And certainly that's, the ethics in sport. This is a huge thing, particularly, when it's a ball game, it's a big team sport. Obviously it's a little bit harder to, throw a match or throw a kick or something like that and have it impact on the outcome of a game. When you're dealing with motorsport where, hypothetically a competitor could have, placed a large bet on a certain competitor, not making it to the end of the race, or being the first car out, and they might drive their car sort of directly into them, punt them into the gravel trap, and could, in theory, pocket a big payday. It's a big part of the International Sporting Code from the FIA, It's also, I've forgotten exactly which section it is in the National Competition Rules of Motorsport Australia, but it is addressed in there. And it is something they talk about, when you go through your officials training as well, in terms of, you have to uphold the safe, fair and honest operation of the sport. And for me, the sports betting landscape and how insidious and how integrated it has become with so many other sports, I was really hoping, part of me was a little bit disappointed, when we didn't get all the different odds and all the different notifications and all the special deals about motorsport. Part of me was disappointed about that because it meant, we're not as high a profile sport as we think we are. But a big part of me was hugely appreciative of that because it meant, it means I don't have to worry about this pervasive, insidious, tentacles of this industry finding its way into the sport that I love. And, I have grave reservations about, think of where we were 30 years ago when we were finally weaning ourselves off tobacco money. The big discussion, particularly amongst government, in terms of it's not just protection of children, it's also vulnerable persons to all sorts of forms of addiction. It's things about alcohol sponsorship and sports betting. Those two, particularly now that the cigarette money's gone. It's cui bono, who benefits, but also who's at risk of this sort of integration and promotion. So I'm not saying that all sponsorship's bad, but you certainly have to understand and reflect that there are outcomes for a lot of the negotiations and some of the relationships in the sport. There are a lot of positive outcomes for people in the sport, but there can be negative outcomes for a lot of people who are targeted by the information and the material and the services on offer and are not in a position to appropriately use them in a responsible way.
Yeah, it's obviously an insidious thing. I mean, one of my very best, my closest friends, is a mad keen punter. I mean, and he's just absolutely, God knows how much money he's lost over the years with it, but it just doesn't matter. I mean, he gave it up for a while, and then it was just once again one bet, and the next thing. It's like being an alcoholic. It was this, I'll just have a little bet on the cup or something, and then bang, off he went again. But yes, I mean, sports take it very seriously. As people, Doc and I both worked at the Australian Open, and as people working at the Australian Open, that's one of the reasons why we weren't able to use our phones. Had to be put away. We had to sign, sort of agreements that we would not pass on information because, I mean, I spoke during on a rain day. I was speaking at length to one of the coaches of one of the players, and he told me stuff that, like if I'd have been the sort of person who was interested in gambling on tennis, yes. I could have easily, because it was like, he's carrying a bit of an injury, but we think he'll get through, and so we're not too upset about this rain delay because it'll give him an extra day, hopefully to sort of get over a bit of a stomach injury and all that. And it's like, okay, that's interesting. He's favourite for the match tomorrow. I might have a lazy 20 or something on his opponent because he could just he might not make it through. So we had to sign all sorts, and there are just signs everywhere. You're no betting allowed, no photographs, no you're not to pass on any information from anybody that you talk to, and so they really take it very, very seriously over there. And if you're caught, it's instant dismissal. There's no sort of okay, you've had a warning. It's like, no, you out now. So anyway, okay. So anything more on the? We've got another. Well, we've got another race. No rest for the wicked. We've got another race this weekend. Are we expecting any changes at all? Anything different? I would say no, but
I think a few changes. It's always for me. It's always been Saudi Arabia's always been, Jeddah's always been a race of attrition. So I think that'll come into play.
Yeah, I don't know what the weather's like. You would assume that it's going to be quite hot, even though it's a night race. You would imagine that it would still be fairly warm conditions. Yeah, I think it's like we don't really know. I always think that the Formula One season starts when they get back to Europe. For me, I mean that's where they've got access to their workshops. They've got access to to upgrades that they can quickly get on board. Right now they're in sort of they're in touring mode. And dragging things in, they'll have obviously have a little bit more time between now and Albert Park, and I would imagine there's already parts, on their way, if not here already, for upgrades and for at Albert Park to get to make some changes there based on what they learned in the first round.
Well, I think certainly, Peter, I think you mentioned to it, Saudi Arabia being a race of attrition. It's also a very different style of circuit to Bahrain. Bahrain is very much the traditional Tilke, a lot of high and medium speed corners, but not a huge amount of like flat out running, at close to 200 miles an hour. Whereas Saudi Arabia is a street circuit, except 90+% of it is a permanent race circuit. And it's got so many long straights. It's a little bit like, it's got sections of it a little bit like Baku or like Monza. So we've seen in the past some of those, or Canada, some of those teams in the bottom five, particularly I'm thinking of a Williams, they haven't been able to design a package that's good at almost every track previously, but they've been able to put in some really good results. Think of, Nick De Vries doing the deputizing in the Williams at Monza. I'm thinking of Alex Albon holding off an absolute massive DRS train at many circuits in the past. Some of those teams that don't quite have the resources or the IP to build a car that's great pretty much everywhere, they can go, look, we're going to give up at trying to be good at Monaco. We're going to give up trying to be good at Spa, but we're going to build a car that's good at that's very efficient in terms of its very low drag. And we're going to optimize, we're going to try and get points at Baku. We're going to try and get points at Monza. We're going to try and get points at Canada, and we're going to try and get points at Saudi Arabia. So I think you'll probably see a shake-up of that bottom five. And, if we do have, if one of the Aston Martins is not having a great day, if there happens to be some contact between any of the cars that would occupy the top 10 in the first race, you could see some of those first glimpses of 1 point for 10th place or 2 points for 9th place for some of the teams that traditionally occupy the bottom five teams on the table.
Yeah, Rob saying, will Tsunoda get a penalty for the cool down? I don't know, should he? I mean, it was potentially risky. I mean, in terms of, it wasn't going to be a high speed thing, but I mean, it was, and it certainly wasn't a good look. I mean, should officials get involved? I haven't heard of any of anything coming afterwards, but is it purely an inter-team thing?
I think that's going to make them even more reluctant to get involved in the fact that it's two drivers from the same team.
Yeah, and there hasn't been any. I haven't heard of any penalty.
No, I haven't heard of any investigation or into it. But I mean, it's not the sort of thing that you want to see. And I imagine that the team have had very very stern words to Yuki and saying.
I think they have, because
as a lot of people have. Sorry, Pete.
Because Yuki came out a couple of days later and said, "Oh, I want to be able to." Daniel has great control of his temper and his emotions, and I want to be able to do that. And he's very much in control in the car. So I think he did get a talking to. Well,
all the journalists sort of say Yuki outside of the car, very quiet, very polite young Japanese man. All that. They said that once he's strapped into the car, he becomes
not very Japanese.
Monster. No, it's very unlike
the red mist descends.
Yes, and that's the thing. I mean, because it is very Japanese. Yeah, well, yeah. So it can happen that You got that? I mean, because it was one of the frustrating things when I did the Super GT. My frustration with them was that they just don't lose their temper, and I was losing my temper, and it was like, oh, please, thank you, please, polite, please, so thank you, sir, thank you, please, you can keep your voice down, and it was like, forget about your bloody polite and all the rest of it.
I'd like to see Gunther Steiner go to Japan and run a Japanese team. This guy's going on here. It's like bloop, bloop, bloop.
It would be an interesting cultural. Is that now? That's there you go, Gunther. If you're watching, there's a reality television show concept for you. Gunther Steiner goes and runs the Super GT team in Japan. Perhaps a nice GT 300 team or something.
Gunther would be big in Japan.
Yes, I imagine he is already. So yes, as you say, he would be very big. But
shall we turn our attention a little bit locally? We've got a great VHRR Phillip Island Historic Festival of Motorsport coming up this weekend. We've got the Adelaide Motorsport Festival happening next weekend. We've got the second round of the Victorian State Circuit Racing Championships next weekend. We've got the Shannon Speed Series in Tasmania next weekend. There's so much motorsport.
Oh, it's crazy. It's unbelievable. Yes, as I said, tomorrow night on the show, Andrew McCarthy talking about his car and talking about groups Q and R and P and all the rest of it. The Formula 5000s will be the Formula 5000s are getting getting a dedicated race, but they will be also involved. That's going to be insane. There's going to be three or four. Yeah. Now, not all of the 5000s. Perhaps not all of them will join in that race, but enough of them will. And then you add them to the Formula 1 cars, the Formula Atlantic Pacific cars, the Formula 2 cars, the Can-Am car that's there, the Spider.
Formula Holdens?
Formula Holdens, Formula 3, at least one or two Formula 3000s. That's going to be insane.
Spicy. Like it.
Yeah.
Rolls RT4s.
Yeah, you've got a couple of, we haven't seen them. Now, the other one, I don't know whether this is going to happen. I don't know whether I'm supposed to even say this because a bit of inside information. However, coming over from there is a competitor coming over, because usually a few, because they make a big deal of it. There's some competitors coming over from Western Australia, and as I said, every year they sort of, they all get together. This is how they work together. They say, hey, we're going over. Do you want to share the cost? We're going to get transporters. We're going to basically have a huge convoy. They bring all these cars across, and competitors from Western Australia. One of the competitors coming over is coming across in his Rolt RT4. Now, the Formula Pacific car, the point is he has two Rolt RT4s, and apparently he's bringing both of them. I don't know. That's the first time that's kicked in. That's thank you very much, Apple. That's the first time.
I know that people have been suffering from inflation everywhere, Brett, but that's a very first-hand demonstration of how inflation's affecting everyday Australians.
I got to find out how to turn. I'm not even sure what I did. I think I did that. Did I?
Yes.
No, and it's not doing it again. There you are. No.
And a couple of times you've had a thumbs down come through as well.
Oh, that's just from the viewers. That's got nothing to do with me. Yes, but anyway, this the second Rolt is coming across. I mean, I suppose for spares as much as anything. But the owner of said Rolt has been in touch with a Mr. Bow and said, I will be there. My Rolt will be there. Will you be there? And if so, would you perhaps like to jump into my my RT4 for old time's sake? And I think John was looking at it very, very, very carefully. We caught up with him at Rob Roy, of course. We did the internal live stream there. We were doing the switching on that for them over the weekend, and John was the patron of the event, and we were talking to him. Also, we're talking to him about something very interesting. Didn't have time to talk to Peter. I'll let you and the crew know about this on Tuesday. Talking to John about something very special, possibly coming up on a later edition of In Pit Lane that will be very, very interesting and very different. So Yes, so there you go. But yeah, so hopefully, who knows? We might even see John Bower behind the wheel again of a Rolt RT4, because of course he was very famous
Awesome.
in that particular car, in the old Lucky Nuts car, and not just here in Australia. Went and raced at Long Beach as well, and was quite competitive in a one-off appearance there. So that would be really great if that actually happens. But yes, it is looking like a huge meeting. We got 10 Formula 5000s from New Zealand coming across, with 10 local cars, and some of the local cars we haven't seen for a while. So that's going to be great. And as I said, they've got their own dedicated Formula 5000 race, sort of around lunchtime on Sunday, sort of an Formula 5000 Grand Prix event. But as I said, they will be racing with the QP&R sports racing cars, and that will be sensational. So, and then you've got a big field of touring cars turning up again. We've got historic touring cars, huge fields of Group N. It's not quite back to where it was before COVID, but it's certainly heading there. Certainly the biggest field and the biggest turnout that we've seen since the Great Reset. So yeah, looking forward to it. Wish I could get down for, as I said tomorrow night. Unfortunately, we won't be doing a half-hour special this year, simply because just don't have the money, because the cost of going down. The problem is it's a long weekend here in Melbourne as well for Labor Day, so accommodation at Phillip Island what is already at a premium, and then you add something like this. The cheapest accommodation I could find when I went looking for it was nearly $3,500 for 2 nights. For three of us to turn up. So yeah, ridiculous prices.
Reminding me of the days of going to Phillip Island, where with supercarts, and there'd be a dozen people to getting hold of a house for the weekend.
Just well, we
spread the costs.
We of course used to have the Falcon having a run Saturday week. We're told they're closing the circuit. Yes, there are going to be further track improvements made. They've just resurfaced the track, and they're going to make some more. Improvements and some more things to go. We lost Pete for a second, but yeah, so they are going to make some more improvements out there, and that's meant the changing of a couple of dates, including the Victorian State Circuit Racing Championship. They've had to move one of their dates to later on in the year because the track will be. The track will be closed, but they're certainly spending some money. There's no doubt they're spending some money down there. The problem is that it continues to sort of price people out. Talking to a couple of people from the State Series a while ago, and they were just saying it's becoming so expensive to hire that facility and to have use of it that it's becoming quite prohibitive. But at the moment, they've got, especially if Sandown closes, they'll have very few. They'll have very few other options unless Avalon gets built, and I'm still putting money on the fact that Avalon will never be built. So,
does this is sort of something of a theme we're seeing? The last sort of 4 or 5 weeks, there's been so many events on, but so many of them haven't really felt like they're bursting at the seams. It's almost like, are we better off having, 80%
of events,
75% of the events with 125% of the attendance?
Well, like I said, for the opening round of the Shannons, the Speed Series, I mean, there's nothing happened on track on Sunday until midday. Now, if I paid $35 to go see a day, and it didn't start until midday, and we had about 4 races or something. Meanwhile, on the very same weekend, down the road at Phillip Island, the RX8 Cup, those guys came down from Sydney with about 23, 24 cars, were running around. They couldn't get a spot on the speed, so they were down there with the supercarts. And then a couple of weeks later, last weekend, the Excels were down at Phillip Island at the latest sort of Phillip Island access. They're racing. They were the only racing category because the supercarts were over at the bend. So you had supercarts running at the bend. You had a bunch of XLs running down at Phillip Island. You had the Rob Roy
Ooh.
on. You had that's just in Victoria, and then there's all this other stuff happening interstate, and it's got crazier now. Now they want to introduce more categories as well. We've got we've got all sorts of things like once again now we've got the you'd know about what's your take on the replica tourers, Mark? Because this is another question. There's something in the water up there. It must be drinking 4X or something has got to addle your brain or something.
Is this the artist formerly known as the Queensland Touring Car Championship, the artist formerly known as Queensland V8s, the artist formerly known as sports sedans that aren't really sports sedans?
The QTCC does still exist and still exists quite strongly. There is, to some extent, a spin-off in nature of replica tours, but by the same token, they've also embracing of different vehicles, and the Queensland Touring Car Championship both series have both had as part of their core theming throwback to earlier eras of Australian tin top motor racing.
These are the people that have the prescription rose tinted glasses. Copy that. Yep.
But yeah, there's always been a lot of Tiranas and older model Commodores around this kind of a series. QTCC kind of was going a little bit nowhere until back in the days when it was called the V8 series, until the introduction of BMW, and then the series really took off quite quickly Replica Tours. Replica Tours run by Brian Smallwood, a long-time Gemini racer, and then he got into a Toyota 86 in more recent times. And Brian has kind of taken hold of the parts of the QTCC philosophy, but also broadened it a bit. And there's an interesting mix of vehicles that run in replica tours, and for want of a better term, as far as the two series have split themselves apart, QTCC is a bit more hardcore racers, and while at the same time still being an amateur competition, and replica tours is a bit more casual.
Because they're obviously, the word is that they want to introduce them down here. There's some people involved down here who want to bring replica tours to Victoria. And the point is, where the hell do they race? I mean, we've got a state series which is over subscribed already. I suppose they could go to if they're happy to race with AASA, there may be room for them on the Victorian Motor Racing Championship.
Well, that's coming up. How they run up here.
So that would be the
AASA aligned category.
Right. So that would be the plan. I imagine that they would join in with perhaps Super TT, which is a similar sort of almost a run what you brung sort of concept, but they would go in and run in the VMRC with them, because obviously a lot happening with that series. Coming up not this week but the week after out at Calder will be the opening round of the AASA's Victorian Motor Racing Championship. And as I say on the show tomorrow, we did want to talk about it and some other things with the AASA. We've made numerous approaches to Steve and the people up at AASA. We've sent emails, we've made phone calls, and to try and get someone on Tuesday night. But at this stage, nobody's coming in at this stage from AASA to preview that event and to talk about other things, including the fact that the Hyper Racers will be running there and they will be contesting the Australian Drivers' Championship. What do we think of that, Dave? I'll start with you because you're sort of, you've got a bit of a dog in this fight in terms of family history. The Stillwell name does appear several times on that honour roll. How do you feel about the Australian Drivers' Championship being conducted for Hyper Racers?
So, disclaimer, all opinions are my own and are flavoured with ice cream and do not reflect those of any organisation I may or may not be associated with. I don't have a dog in the fight. The only point I'd make is that the Australian Drivers' Championship or the Gold Star, which of course are two separate things, and someone has a right to one thing but potentially not the other. Although I'm sure the people at Motorsport Australia will be reviewing quite a number of trademarks and or copyrights.
The bizarre thing is the trademark that Motorsport Australia got, and I don't forget that, but it is a very sort of convoluted. It is the Motorsport Australia Gold Star for the Australian Drivers' Championship. I think that's what they've got. But the term the Australian Drivers' Championship itself is now owned by Mountain Motorsports, who also now own the Australian Touring Car Championship as well.
Yeah. So in the nicest way possible, the Australian Drivers' Championship has always been for what is the pinnacle of Australian open wheel racing. You know, when they brought in international spec Formula 4 about eight or nine? Oh, how long ago was that now? 10 years ago?
Yeah.
They specifically said, no, we are not awarding the Australian Drivers' Championship or the Gold Star for this series. It was previously held by obviously S5000, which at the moment is parked. Obviously, Barry and Gary have got other things on at the moment, and there's that whole licensing scenario. Yeah, but that was a pinnacle, international drivers coming to Australia, competing for the Australian Drivers' Championship. Before that, it was held by Formula 3, which, although it was one of the steps on the ladder, it wasn't internationally relevant, high spec. They run very few FIA accredited Grands Prix were run for cars under Formula 3 regulations. One of which, of course, was the Macau Grand Prix. So to give the Australian Drivers' Championship to Formula 3 was indeed, and of course it was held by the artist formerly known as Formula Brabham / Holden / 4000 / whatever, etc. before that. It's never been held by a grassroots club racing targeted amateur grassroots level of the sport. That's not to take anything away from the concept that the hyper racer guys and girls have put together. I've seen some of the cars. It looks like it's a cost-effective way of going motor racing.
They put on great race. I mean, I've got nothing against the category. I mean, John and Dean have done an extraordinary job.
Yeah.
But I mean, it really is a glorified, like it's a higher end track day car, but that's essentially what it is. It's a track day car.
Look, at the end of the day, ownership is 9/10 of the law. I don't imagine that the folks at Canterbury Road have received these news and press releases with any sort of great amount of cheer and satisfaction.
If you do the search, they did actually contest it at the time. It was contested when it was there, and and in both cases, for both the Australian Touring Car Championship and the Australian Drivers' Championship, they lost. And from what I've been able to sort of glean from the little bit of stuff that is sort of put out there by the people involved for the trademark, it was essentially sort of use it or lose it. It was you're not using it, and so you can't just hold these things forever. They sort of changed some regulations now to sort of say that if you can't just warehouse these things. If you're using it, great. If you're not,
So as I said, look, we've seen the Australian Drivers' Championship come and go, because there hasn't been a series or a level of car or technology or a group of drivers that, is appropriate for that title to be awarded. Do I think hyper racers have the potential to do that? I certainly don't think that they're lacking in the energy and the enthusiasm and the drive to achieve that level. Is it where it is right now? Probably not. And I just say, someone put up a comment before about, what are your thoughts on RX8 Cup versus Formula RX8? We talk about, another category, coming in with replica tourers. Every time in this sport where people have, steered it in a different direction or broken up and tried to do the same or the very similar thing with antagonistic or direct competition in mind, running events at the same level of the sport in the same region, targeting the same competitors and the same officials on the same weekend, nobody wins.
Never ends well.
And it doesn't matter who comes out of it, with more or less competitors. Everyone loses because people get distracted. Competitors build cars for one set of regulations that's then not eligible for another set of regulations. They get disenchanted. They go, well, if it's too hard for me to go and do that one, I won't do it anymore. Nobody wins. It's only when we're all pulling in the one direction that we have a strong and viable multiple levels of the sport. We saw it. We've seen it in IndyCar. We've even seen it in other codes. Remember, what was Kerry Packer's big, shit fight with cricket?
World Series cricket. That was
who won? No one. When American open wheel racing tore itself to pieces.
Actually, ultimately, Kerry Packer won because he eventually got what he wanted, which was the rights the rights to cricket. I mean, that was his argument because he was throwing huge amounts of money at the Australian Cricket Board, as it was at the time, and saying, hey, I want the rights to cricket. And they were saying, no, the cricket is on the ABC. It will always be on the ABC. This is not about money, Mr. Packer. And in the end, I mean, he got what he wanted. He got sort of 20 odd years or more of cricket rights in Australia until they sort of decided that, hang on, this tennis has got a much broader appeal. Let's jump on that and cricket goodbye. So
Virtual R put up IndyCar kart. American open wheel racing, in the early 90s was so strong and so vibrant. We have those rose-tinted glass moments of multiple competing engine manufacturers, multiple competing chassis manufacturers, fire-breathing, methanol-fueled, 900 horsepower road course, street course, oval course cars, and within a few short years, no one has the attention span for American open wheel racing anymore.
Speaking of attention span, just quickly before we head off, that sort of came out of nowhere. The World Rallycross Championships coming to Australia. We don't know where yet. We do know that apparently it's going to be the final round, but that came out of nowhere. Now I'm wondering. We know that the TCR World Tour is not coming to Australia, and we know that the New South Wales government funding of the Bathurst International was probably part of the deal was that it was, quote, international. If it's not international as well, could this be sort of a replacement for Bathurst, and could we see the World Rallycross Championship at Sydney Motorsport Park?
Well, I mean, governments have, allocated the funding to spend in certain ways. And if this is something that is definitely international and obviously targets a certain demographic, rallycross does tend to skew to more towards the action sports, the short, shall we say that the shorter attention span, sort of newer attendees and interactions with the sport. If this is, in the same way that competitors have got to be careful about where they spend their money and with who, so do governments, particularly the New South Wales government, which of course was only able to give supercars and the New South Wales, so the Newcastle City Council, a 1-year extension to the deal for the Newcastle 500. That event is no more, and then they're saying, well, that's a silly decision for the region. Just was like, you made the decision not to commit to it for a longer term period of time. If this is something that, particularly from a rallycross is one of those sports where unlike rally, which of course goes all over the place and it's very distributed, rallycross being in very much a stadium environment, close in terms of your tangible return on investment, in terms of what are the crowd figures, what does it look like, how many people actually showed up, this will be far better from a able to establish and verify the return on investment compared to, say, a round of the World Rally Championship.
Yeah, and they could have it. I mean, there's an opportunity you could do sort of the stadium supercross type thing where you could, have a stadium, something like Stadium Australia. I mean, I'm sure they could come up with something there for something happening out in the car park, coming through doing something in the stadium and coming out again, or Sydney Motorsport Park, or I'm sure there's lots of things, but we don't know where it's going to be. But it's certainly interesting.
Where's the historic home of rallycross in Australia?
Catalina Park.
Okay.
Well, Calder is there.
Possibly not Catalina. It's
I think that's
as far as circuits that are closed in Australia, I think that's the most closed.
It's the most likely to continue to remain closed. Look, I think Calder would be an awesome opportunity for that event. It's close to a freeway, it's close to public transport, it's within sight of however many millions of paying spectators. It's got configurable facilities that I'm sure Rowan Harmon could get out there with his boys in a forklift and basically make any sort of course that you wanted.
Well, they've got all. I mean,
recent Toyota commercial that was filmed there.
Exactly.
And that was kind of a rallycross format.
Well, they
can you imagine rallycross on the banked corners, like chucking it sideways around a whole bunch of barrels with smoke billowing off the whisk? Yes, I could. I mean, we might have to get a sponsor to
the spot. I mean,
short of the rally of Monza, that round of the Italian rally championship that is held entirely within the bounds of the Monza race circuit, there's no other opportunity to see these sort of cars running around on a banked facility.
Yeah,
it
would be a really good, because it is a blank canvas. I mean, essentially, they've got the basics. The basics are all there in terms of the bitumen stuff. That bit's covered, and then it's just a matter of like where do you want to go for your dirt track stuff? Do you want to take it infield on the dome? Do you want to put it infield on the and around the the original rallycross track was? You could even I'm sure you could just basically recreate the original rallycross track, and of course now they've got sort of that area down the bottom that for the extended section around Mount Jane and all the rest of it. So you'd have to include that, you would imagine, before they'd go back onto the dirt. So it would be a really good spot. But I imagine for an event like that there would have to be government money involved somewhere, and I just don't think at the moment the Victorian government, with the commitments to both the Australian Grand Prix and the motorcycle Grand Prix.
And considering they pulled the pin on the Commonwealth Games bit as well.
Yeah, so, and which is another reason for, I mean, Avalon's gone very good. We only know that the funding from the government was to take the next step of the planning situation. I mean, to basically look at the business, put together the business case and the plan for the track to say, what's it going to look like? How feasible is it? Now, if the business case turns around and says, actually, this is an awful lot of money that we're not going to make back, is that the end? That's the end of Avalon, and Sandown closes, and okay, but we've Calder Park there's a lot of upside in somebody, whether it's Rodney or the government or somebody, putting some money into bloody Calder Park.
Remember the last time someone with the surname Jane spent a lot of time and energy and money finding an international series to come to Australia. He did it once in the 80s and once in the 90s. In the 80s, he came up with a concept for the Australian Grand Prix, which then went to Adelaide. And then in the 90s, he then obviously came up with the concept for the Thunderdome. And of course, that brought NASCAR and oval racing down under. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to everyone watching tonight. Thank you very much. I'm going to have to disappear. I've got a gentleman downstairs with some dinner for me.
Okay, well, I don't have a gentleman downstairs doing anything at all because I don't have downstairs. But I think that's basically a good time to talk, because we have been going for over an hour. There has been so much to talk about, and we will talk about more of it next week at the same time. Thank you to everybody for joining us once again. Really, The bend apparently has a purpose-built rallycross track, so it's done. So
Yes,
there's
yes,
a
they
very
do.
definite option. Yeah, so that would be once again, unfortunately, it is a bit far out, but it's it's obviously a really it's similar to Calder, and there's pretty much a blank. And if they've got a rallycross track there already, then that would equally make sense, probably more sense, depending on we know the South Australian government has a bit of a thirst for motorsport, a bit of a hunger for motorsport.
Well,
So
please
they
bring
might
back the
be.
race of 1,000 years.
Yes, yeah, oh yes, that wouldn't. Yes, please.
Sorry.
Um,
Yeah.
okay. Yes, thank you. I hope Chris is recovering. Well, yes, I need to get in touch with Chris to find out how his eye operations went. So we'll catch up with
Damn,
him.
I forgot.
Yeah, so we'll catch up with him. We'll catch up with him very, very soon, and we'll let you know if Chris might join us next week. If not, we'll let you know how it all went. Okay, everybody. Okay, thank you to everybody for joining us again. Now, remember, in Pit Lane tomorrow night at the later time of 9:30, free to air, right across Melbourne, Australia's only prime time free to air motorsport show. In fact, I think it's now the only motorsport news show in Australia at any time. So you can watch it. You can enjoy it. As I said, we have special guest Andrew McCarthy talking about Phillip Island Historic. We take you to Rob Roy and we catch up with the incredible twin-engined Eldred Norman special, and you will see that tomorrow night, and we will have a half-hour special of the Rob Roy revival coming up later in the year, coming up the basically Easter week, the week after Easter. We will have that's sort of traditionally been the time we've had our Phillip Island thing, but as I said, unfortunately we won't be able to do that this year, but we'll still have some great historic racing coming up, and that's Rob Roy, because it was a great meeting, fabulous, and thank you to the MG Car Club for their hospitality. I'm glad we were able to help out with the stream, the internal stream. Unfortunately, we couldn't go live. We did a bit of an experiment, but unfortunately, it's the link to the outside world from Smith's Gully is not good, and it really wasn't feasible. We'd have to basically involve Mr. Musk and his satellite in terms to get a signal out there. But who knows? Next year might just happen, because it was very successful. They looked really good on the big screen, and we will have some footage of that as well. We'll be getting hold of that footage later on the year.
If only there was a stream for the Phillip Island historics.
Yeah, well, I think like there was the 1 year. I think there's one there is the cost, but I think there's sort of partly a political thing there. I know that certainly the president of the VHRR, Ian Tate, is very much of the opinion that the year that they did do the live stream, that he believes it cost them a lot of paying spectators, and as well as money. So. They basically, the argument was that they won't be doing it. We certainly tried to get them to do it for years and years, both historic Sandown, historic Phillip Island. We were there. We put up our hand and said we'd love to do a live stream from there, even if it's only on a very small scale. Unfortunately, they were never interested, and in the end, they did go to Blend Line once again and pay the big dollars to get them down, and it was very successful. I think in terms of the number of people who watched online, but certainly from the VHRR standpoint, what I've been told is that they felt that it did have quite an effect on the gate coming in, and certainly Ian Tate was of the opinion that why are we giving this? If you want to see it, come down and see it. And as I said, unfortunately, we have had the half-hour special. So if you missed out, you could at least watch some highlights on In Pit Lane. But unfortunately, like I said, as Paul said, why not drive down? Once again, it's just too expensive. It's just I just don't have the money right now to be spending, even just because of the petrol. It's $120, $140 just in fuel going back and forwards each day, let alone wear and tear on a car that's on, you know, and it's a bit dodgy. Getsy is not well known. We need to. I've got to find the time to get to Dr. Declan and there, but he's very busy and I'm very busy, and it's, as Dave said, it's just crazy at the moment. We don't have a break. We just really don't. It's just gone crazy. Okay, everybody, we will see you next week. Thanks a lot. I'll see you, Pete, on Tuesday night for another edition of In Pit Lane. At this stage, just 95% confirmed. We might have Carrera Cup, returning to the Carrera Cup. TCR racer Dylan O'Keefe will be joining us on coming up on this week's program, or next week's program. Okay, everybody, we'll see you. We'll see you next week. Until then, thanks for joining us, everyone, and bye for now.
See you.